Somewhere on a savanna 50,000 years ago, a woman has been in labor for hours. She is squatting on the ground beside a small fire. Her mother is behind her, holding her shoulders. Two of her sisters are crouched in front of her. The men have walked to the far side of the camp. Everyone in the band knows what is happening. Nobody is on a phone. There is no doctor. There is no hospital. There is no machine measuring anything. The only sounds are her breathing, the fire, and the soft voices of the women who have done this before. And in a few minutes, a brand new human being is going to take its first breath into a world that is not changed in 300,000 years. What did your ancestors actually do when a baby arrived? The answer turns out to be one of the most quietly stunning chapters in all of human evolution. Because of all the things our species does differently than every other animal on Earth, the way we welcome a new person into the world might be the strangest of them all. Let's start with biology, because human birth is genuinely bizarre. Most mammals give birth alone. A horse falls in a quiet corner of the field. A cat hides in a cupboard. A chimpanzee climbs into a tree and delivers without anyone else around. The baby comes out, the mother licks it clean, and within hours it can stand, walk, and follow her. The whole process is private and efficient. Human birth is not like that. For a start, our babies' heads are enormous compared to our birth canals. The anthropologist Wendy Trevathan at New Mexico State University has spent her career studying this. She argues that humans are the only primate species where giving birth is so mechanically difficult that mothers almost always need help. A horse can foal alone. A chimp can deliver alone. A human, in most cases, cannot. The shape of our pelvis and the size of our infants' heads make the rotation through the birth canal so precise that another set of hands has been useful for at least the last few 100,000 years. So unlike almost every other animal, human birth is a social event. It always has been. What that event looks like in hunter-gatherer cultures is remarkably consistent. The mother is usually attended by other women. Her own mother, her sisters, sometimes an experienced older woman in the band who functions as a midwife. The men leave, they go hunt, or they go to the other end of camp. The women take over. The mother often squats, supported by another woman behind her. The space is small, the fire is close. Sometimes there is singing, sometimes there is silence. The midwife catches the baby. The cord is tied off, often with plant fiber, and cut with a sharp flake of stone or shell. In some societies, the mother is left almost entirely alone. Among the Shkung of the Kalahari, women historically walked a short distance from the camp into the bush to give birth by themselves. They came back hours later with a baby. The cultural ideal was strength and independence. But even those women had usually delivered other women's babies before their own, and there was always someone nearby if something went wrong. Whatever the variation, there was one universal. The moment the baby arrived, every single thing that happened next was about contact. In modern hospitals, newborns are often wrapped, swaddled, sometimes placed in a separate bassinet, sometimes taken to a nursery. For 99% of human history, none of this existed. The baby was placed immediately, naked, on the mother's bare chest. It stayed there. It fed there. It slept there. The mother's body kept it warm. The mother's heartbeat kept it calm. The mother's smell was the first thing it learned about the world. This wasn't tradition. This was survival. A newborn human cannot regulate its own temperature. It cannot find food on its own. It cannot escape danger. For the first months of its life, the mother's body was the entire environment. There was nothing else. Then there was the question of the placenta. This is one of the strangest universals in anthropology. Almost every human culture on Earth has some kind of ritual or rule about what to do with the placenta. The Navajo bury it. Some Indonesian cultures plant a tree over it. The Maori traditionally bury it in a place of family importance, calling it wenua, which is also the word for land. Some cultures hang it in a tree. A few have historically eaten it. Some West African groups treat the placenta as a twin of the baby, a sibling that needs its own farewell. We do not know exactly when these rituals began, but the fact that they show up in cultures that have never had contact with each other suggests something deep. The placenta was never just biological waste. It was the first thing your body ever shared with another person, and your ancestors knew it. Once the baby was born, fed, and warm, the next question was who would help raise it? The answer is everyone. In 2009, the anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy published a book called Mothers and Others that completely changed how scientists understood human parenting. Her core argument was this: humans are not a species in which mothers raise their children alone. Humans are what biologists call a cooperative breeder. Aunts, grandmothers, older siblings, cousins, family friends, everyone in the group invests in raising every child. The technical name for this is allomothering. It means other mothering, and we are extraordinarily good at it. Among the Ife pygmies of Central Africa, anthropologists have observed that infants in the first weeks of life are held by an average of 14 different people in a single day. Among the Hadza, babies are passed around constantly. A Hadza infant might breastfeed from another woman in the band if its own mother is busy. Older children carry babies on their hips from the age of 4 or 5. Grandmothers carry their grandchildren as if they were their own. This wasn't random kindness. It was the evolutionary engine that made our species possible. In 1997, an anthropologist named Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah proposed something now called the grandmother hypothesis. She had spent years studying Hadza women and noticed something unusual. Among the Hadza, the most productive food gatherers in the entire camp were not the young mothers. They were the grandmothers. Women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s brought back more food per day than mothers in their 20s because they were not slowed down by their own infants. Humans are the only primate species in which females live for decades after menopause. In every other primate, females die soon after they can no longer reproduce. We don't. Hawkes argued that this is because grandmother labor was so valuable that natural selection actually extended the female human lifespan. A grandmother who could feed her grandchildren made the whole genetic line more likely to survive. You exist because of the women in your family who are too old to have babies and spent that energy feeding the ones their daughters had. While the group raised the child, the mother carried it constantly. Anthropologists have measured this. A Hadza or a Shea baby in the first year of life is in physical contact with another human being for somewhere between 90 and 95% of every single day. They sleep on a body, they wake on a body. They are carried in slings made of hide, cloth, or woven fiber against their mother's chest or hip while she walks, gathers, talks, cooks. There is almost no time when they are alone, lying on a surface looking at the ceiling. That moment is essentially a modern invention. This is what some researchers now call the fourth trimester. The idea that human babies are actually born about 3 months too early compared to other primates, and that for those first 3 months they still need the conditions of the womb: warmth, motion, sound, constant pressure. Hunter-gatherer parents provided that automatically by carrying their babies everywhere. Modern parents have to invent ways to recreate it. And here is one of the most surprising consequences of all this contact. Hunter-gatherer babies almost never cry. In 2017, a team of researchers measured the crying patterns of infants across multiple cultures. The data is consistent across decades of fieldwork. Babies in hunter-gatherer societies cry far less than babies in industrialized countries. They cry shorter. They cry less often. They almost never have what modern parents call colic. The reason is not that the babies are different. The reason is that the response is different. When a Hadza infant fusses, somebody picks it up within seconds. There is no waiting. There is no letting them cry it out. The need is met before it becomes distress. Over time, the baby simply learns that there is no reason to cry for long. The modern Western child rears in a fundamentally different environment than the one human nervous systems evolved to expect. Breastfeeding worked the same way. In every hunter-gatherer society researchers have ever studied, babies are breastfed not for a few months, but for years. The average weaning age across hunter-gatherer cultures is somewhere between 3 and 4 years. Among some groups it goes longer. There was no formula. There were no bottles. There was no schedule. The baby fed when it wanted. The mother's body responded. The relationship was almost constant. But here is the hardest part of the story, and it is hard for a modern person to read. For all the love, all the contact, all the allomothering, infant mortality in ancient societies was devastating. The best estimates from skeletal evidence and modern hunter-gatherer comparisons suggest that somewhere between 30 and 40% of children born to ancient mothers died before they turned 5. There were no antibiotics, there were no vaccines. A fever that you would treat today with one prescription could end an entire small life in 3 days. This is why so many ancient cultures did not name a child immediately. In many societies, names were given only after the baby had survived the first weeks, the first months, sometimes the first year. The naming ceremony was the official entry of a new person into the tribe. Before that, the baby existed somewhere in between, half arrived, not yet anchored to the group. Some societies treated this passage with elaborate ritual. The baby would be presented to elders marked with ochre or ash, blessed by the shaman, given a name that often carried the meaning of how or when it was born. Among them Mbuti, a forest tribe of Central Africa, children were not considered fully human until they had been formally welcomed by the forest itself, in a ceremony that bonded them to the place they would live in for the rest of their lives. The baby did not just belong to its parents, it belonged to the world it was being added to. Then came growth, and another invention you might not realize is one. Childhood in modern societies is something we keep deeply separated from adulthood. Children play with other children. They are kept away from work, from danger, from the real world. In hunter-gatherer cultures, this divide does not really exist. Anthropologist David Lancy has spent decades studying childhoods across cultures. His finding is that for most of human history, children did not have what we would recognize as a childhood. By the age of 3, a child would already follow her mother into the brush. By 5 or 6, she could find food on her own. By 8, a Hadza boy could be sent out alone with a small bow and come back with a bird. Children spent their days in mixed-age playgroups, learning by watching, by imitating, by being trusted to attempt the things they saw the adults doing. Adults rarely directed the play. They rarely interfered with the disputes. The other children handled it. Older kids taught younger kids. The whole culture was passed sideways between bodies of children who had a few more months of experience than the ones they were teaching. This is the world the human brain evolved to grow up in. We have replaced almost all of it. We give birth alone in hospitals, surrounded by strangers. We separate the newborn from the mother for testing. We swaddle, we bottle, we put the baby in a separate room, in a separate crib. We expect babies to sleep alone, to feed on a schedule, to stop crying because they were left to cry. We wean them in months, not years. We send them to spaces where they only see other children of exactly their own age. We bring back the grandparents only for holidays. We invented all of this in the last few human generations, and we are still figuring out what it cost us. The original way of welcoming a baby was the work of an entire band. The mother was held, the baby was passed from arms to arms to arms. The grandmother fed the family, the older children kept watch. The shaman blessed, the placenta was honored. The first thing that newborn ever knew was that it was not alone and would not be for as long as the small society around it could keep it that way. You are not built to enter the world that way anymore. But somewhere in your wiring, your earliest expectation was still the old one. A body, a heartbeat, a warm chest, the smell of a person who would not put you down. It is the oldest welcome the human species has ever known.